Welcome to Beat Burnout interview series. I'm TanIya Hussein, your host, and today with me I have Peggy Oliveira, all the way from Phoenix, Arizona in the United States. Peggy has a soulful way of getting you to connect with your truth, your pain, your fears, your dreams, and your desires that inspire you. She basically gets you to look underneath the surface and honor the whisper of your soul. Peggy is known as the survivor whisperer. She weaves her story of her impact and healing from child sexual abuse with her 15 plus years of experience as a trauma therapist and advocate to inspire you to release what holds you back and courageously step into the life you deserve. Peggy is the founder of Courageous Journeys and a practice of guiding people on their journey to freedom through one-to-one sessions, group coaching, online programs, and her transformational journey to freedom retreat. Thank you, Peggy, for joining us. Peggy's a social worker like me. How did you get to be doing what you're doing now?
First, can I just say thank you for inviting me. I'm really excited to be here, and I really am particularly excited to know that we're going to be reaching other social workers. So I got into the work that I do now, I think somewhat similarly to how a lot of us in social work or healing find our way. It's about wanting to understand, right? Like we want to understand, we want to help, because we know what different kinds of things feel like, and we know what kind of struggles are out there. And so I went into social work because when I looked at what social work was, I felt at home with it. It just felt like a natural, of course, that's what I would do. Started out actually as a psychology major, and that just didn't feel quite right. But in one of my lectures, it's when I was in university, I had a professor who brought in somebody from a local rape crisis center to talk a little bit about their agency and what they did. And this was a victims of violence class. And immediately, I had just begun my own journey of healing, but I thought, I want to work there someday. I want to work there someday. And I did. I actually first went there for my own healing, which was an interesting coincidence. And then later, after I finished my master's degree, I went back to work there. And so that was the beginning, years and years ago, of my work, specifically working with survivors of sexual abuse and assault. And it just, again, was one of the times that I felt like this is what I'm meant to do. This is the work that I believe in wholeheartedly, and through my own healing recognize that there's so much that we live with as survivors of abuse that people don't talk about, that people don't really fully understand. Even a lot of therapists don't really understand what it means to be a survivor of childhood abuse. They approach it more from a symptom relief and medical model. I wanted people to understand that they could actually heal and not just treat their symptoms, that they weren't a diagnosis, that their struggle was really because of what they had experienced and the impact that had on them. So here I am several years later, eventually doing my own practice, and then now doing the work all online.
And I know some people that are watching, they're probably, because you've had a transition from a psychology major to a social worker to a therapist and now online coach. So there's been quite a lot of transition. Could you tell me a little bit about that journey?
Sure. When I went into social work, it was interesting. I had no intention on ever being a therapist. That was really not something that appealed to me. But at least here in the States, once you get a master's degree in social work, as you do your internship and get a job, most of them are as therapists. And so when I did my internship was as a therapist, and it was different than I had expected. And I worked with children who were at risk of being taken out of their homes. And that was hard. That was really difficult. But then when I was finished with graduate school, I worked in the same organization as a therapist. And it was just hard working with the children, and it wasn't really what I anticipated doing. And then I went to the Center for Prevention of Abuse, and which is where I started my work with crisis sexual assault and abuse. So I was a therapist there. I was also an advocate, which was really nice because I got to use some of those more social work and advocacy skills, which was nice, which I really did enjoy. But most of my work was as a therapist. So I fell into being a therapist. And then when I left the center, we moved, and I worked at another rape crisis organization, but it just wasn't, honestly, it just wasn't ran very well. So it just had a very different feel to it, and there was a lot of turnover, and that didn't feel good to me because the children that we served were not, in my opinion, being served well because the therapists were not respected in a way to keep them in the center. And so I thought, okay, I'll just go do private practice and see if I can make that work. And I did. And I was surprised, actually, that people, when you could go for free at the Rape Crisis Center down the street, would actually pay to do the same kind of work. And so that was really interesting. And so I started my private practice in 2007 originally. And then in 2014, my husband and I decided that we wanted to travel. Our children were no longer at home. We were able to do that. And so reluctantly, but also excitedly, I gave up my practice, which was really difficult, and wasn't sure how I was going to progress. I wasn't sure. I had been blogging for a little while at that point. I thought about writing a book, and so considered maybe I would do those things. And then about 6 months later, somebody reached out to me and asked if they could work with me. And I thought, my husband had been trying to push me into doing work online.
Yeah.
So I thought, let's try it and see how it goes. And so that was in 2014. And then in 15, maybe, I decided, yes, I'm going to just continue to do this work online. And so I really think of myself as a mentor. So it's a little bit different than therapy specifically, but of course I still do it very similarly. I just don't work with people that really need a lot more support than I'm able to give them virtually.
I just wanted to ask you, because I think it was really important point that you made was about that you found it really interesting that people paid for therapy when they could get it down the road for free.
Yeah.
And this is something that I've been finding as an online coach, and when I've hired coaches, that sometimes you can get, I don't know whether it's similar or the same, or you can get a lot of things for free nowadays. A lot of counseling can be provided free by your employer. But some people, they choose to invest in their personal development. And for some people that's easy, and for some people that's difficult. And do you think it's the amount of investment, as in money, that's important? Or do you think it's the amount of investment in time? Or do you think it's important to really research who is going to support you? I think that's, I don't know whether my question makes any sense, but I think sometimes investment in personal development, this is something that sometimes social workers and healthcare professionals really struggle with because they're so used to being the help. What would you advise them?
I think, for me, and I know that some people think that if somebody gets something for free, then they're not as invested. That's something that, especially as a therapist in private practice, you hear that all the time. And I have to say that having done my work where nobody paid for the services that we had, I don't believe that of course there's some, but I have some that pay full fee and aren't as invested. But overall, I think that people who receive those services for free were equally invested in their healing and in themselves. So I think money would be the last thing actually on that list. I think the investment of time is a huge part of that. Some people, it's making the time, making it a priority. And for a lot of people, I think it's also, and this is where that self-care and burnout thing comes in, is it's about seeing that making that time is not selfish. It's not self-indulgent. It's necessary to our overall well-being. And the more that we take care of ourselves, the more capacity we have to be there for others, whether that's a partner or a child or in our work. So I think creating the time and thinking of it in a way that isn't about being self-indulgent is so necessary for all of us, for self-care in general, whether that's therapy or coaching or a weekly massage or whatever it might be. And then I also think, especially if there's healing, like if there's really some stuff that you need to heal, I do think support is really important. And professional support can obviously be a part of that. But I also think trying to make sure that you do have somebody that you feel you can share things with, who is supportive of your time, even that you're taking for it.
And I think you've really grasped a really important point. And this is something I've done. I've worked with a lot of sexual abuse survivors over the years, is that the counseling or the therapy or the coaching is one part of it, but you also need a community around you, whether that's a community of friends or family members, or just to hold you sometimes outside of those sessions.
Absolutely.
And I wanted to ask you, how did you get from a very dark place to this life that you now bring of healing, joy? And you also create, because you write as well, because healing isn't just about healing your emotions. Sometimes it's about creating. I'm a writer, and sometimes via my poetry I feel like I create a whole world where I can navigate my emotions. How do you get from that dark place? Because I know a lot of social workers and healthcare professionals that are listening, some of you are very creative. You love your music or you love your writing. How would you get from that dark place to that world of healing and joy and creating?
It's interesting. And even to hear somebody talk about what I do as being a creative is still a little hard for me to fully take that in, because I have never seen myself or describe myself as being creative. And another thing that's a little different, I think, for my process that may be different for some other people, is that when I first started healing, I didn't know that I was healing. I didn't know that you could heal. Actually, I didn't know that you could fully heal from sexual abuse and neglect. What I thought I was doing by going to counseling at the Rape Crisis Center, what I thought I was doing was just trying to be a better person, because I didn't think that I was a good person. And I was afraid that my husband would leave me, quite honestly, if I didn't get my act together. And not because I was doing anything wrong or bad or anything like that, but just because I, like a lot of people, don't necessarily didn't believe in my worthiness. And so when I started my process, it really was not with the intention to heal. And as time went on, I just found that some things that bothered me before didn't really bother me anymore. That I was speaking up more, that I was sharing more of myself, that I wasn't as shy and introverted as I had always been. I wasn't struggling in the same ways. And that is really ultimately what led me to do the work, because I thought, I didn't even know that you could heal. And I think that most people at that time anyway, things have changed a little bit, but not recognizing that. And so in terms of getting to the place where I actually create, whether it's a video or something that I write, or even in doing the retreats, it's been an organic process of just honoring that I have a voice. It really is just been about that, and then sharing from a place of wanting other people to not be held back by the things that we hold ourselves back by. And so it was not so much about wanting to share what I'm writing, it's about wanting to share a message. And for me, I do some writing, but a lot of it really is more video that I do. It just feels easier to me to speak than it does to write.
But Peggy, it's still creating, and it's just so powerful to hear you. And I think you are such a huge inspiration for me and for many of you that are listening to us today, because to allow ourselves just to be vulnerable, but to be strong with it, is something that not very many people can do.
It's scary.
Yes, it's so scary. I just feel so honored to be in your company. I know I've been being a social worker for 3 decades, and I've met lots of social workers who've had such traumatic pasts. That's what's brought them in to do the work that they do, because they want to, by healing others, they want to heal themselves, really, ultimately. And some of them have witnessed extensive and really horrible domestic violence. Their parents were and some horrific scenes, and some of them have been sexually abused, some of them emotionally abused. I can talk about it, but the words never ever really say what they've been through. And yet the work sometimes that social workers and healthcare professionals do sometimes numb you and me to our own pain. Would you say that's true?
I definitely think that's true. And I think one of the biggest reasons for that is that we, as social workers, as even therapists, if your degree is in something different, but we, like you said, we go into this to help heal ourselves as well. And unfortunately, I think for so many of us, we haven't really taken the time to look at what are the ways that we've been wounded, and really take the years really that it takes to continue to deliberately, intentionally work on healing those wounds. And when we don't, in order to show up every day for everybody else, we have to put our own stuff aside. We have to put it away in order to be able to be fully present and do the work that we do. And while it allows us to show up in that way, it's still there. And so not only are we still not fully healed from our own stuff, but we're so easily affected by the stuff that we see and experience every day with our clients, no matter what that looks like. It doesn't have to be the same thing that we experienced. It can be totally different. But the struggle, if the emotions are similar, if the fear is similar, then it reminds us on a very cellular level, own wounding that still hasn't been able to fully heal. And that's one of the things that I think is so important, is that we give ourselves that time and space to really recognize what are those areas. And it doesn't have to be trauma. It doesn't have to be something really significant, but making the space in our lives to make sure that we are being supported and nurtured so that we can feel fully kind of free, because we're not trying to make sure that this other stuff stays over here on the shelf.
And I think sometimes, I've said this before to some very dear friends of mine, sometimes the work that we do, it means that I'm going to speak some bad language here, it feels like some of these people are actually shitting on us. They're dumping that whole emotional crap onto us. And sometimes that can really feel so heavy. And I wanted to ask you, this is something that as a coach, I sometimes hear lots of coaches say, you need to get out of your comfort zone. And for social workers who majority of their life have been surrounded by not just sometimes their own trauma, but sometimes not their own trauma, other people's trauma, they're surrounded by crisis, panic, chaos. That is their norm. So that is their comfort. To experience, joy, stability, just being okay, being comfortable, that's panic. And I sometimes working with people that have been traumatized, and I believe, and I know this is my mission, that social workers and healthcare professionals are traumatized by the trauma of other people sometimes as much as their own. It's like being okay and just being all right and being comfortable with joy and happiness and stability, and that's sometimes what we find hard. Would you agree?
I would agree with that. I think that it is something that a lot of people struggle with. And I think there's potentially a couple of different underlying things there. And one of them, I think, is related a bit to vicarious trauma. But when you see so much pain day in and day out, and you see it in so many different ways, so it's not just one kind of pain, but it's pain coming from so many different angles, it can sometimes bring up guilt. If then you go home at the end of the day and you get to enjoy your life, you get to enjoy your partner or your nice dinner or whatever it is, go get a massage when the person that you were just with can't afford to feed themselves. There's a lot of guilt, I think, that goes on, almost like a survivor guilt in a way, that goes on for a lot of people, and feel badly that they're living a very different life. And sometimes something I've recognized, because I've actually had a lot of clients, not necessarily trauma clients, but clients in general that are therapists and or social workers. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that guilt is because there's something that maybe still needs some healing for yourself. The second part of that, the second thing, sometimes is also boundaries. Mm-hmm. And when we, especially if we can empathize because of personal experience, again, even if it's just a similar feeling, sometimes it can be really difficult to leave that at the office, so to speak, and then come home to your work. And part of that can be the guilt thing that I was just referring to. But sometimes it's also some boundaries, and we can sometimes feel guilty even about having those boundaries, which again is so incredibly necessary. Especially doing social work type stuff. Like healthcare, I think, can be a little bit different at times, because you've typically got shifts where you've got people to cover. When you're not there, you've got an answering service, or it can be a little bit different. As social workers, often we're on call, whether you're a therapist or whether you're working in some sort of social service organization, and that can feel a little bit more difficult. And you know that your clients are often, unfortunately, sometimes literally in life or death situations. It can be hard to separate at the end of the day. And I think that rituals can play a really important role at the end of your day, or at the end of a particularly difficult client. When I say difficult, I don't mean the client's difficult, but just a really hard, difficult situation, to have a ritual to leave that energy, to be able to move on. And then when you get home, have a ritual as well to move into your life and appreciate and maybe even feel some gratitude, because we can hold other people's pain and our own gratitude at the same time.
I love practical suggestions in how to just draw that boundary, it seems, because I know sometimes you have that very difficult day at work, and you come and then you've got your kids screaming at you and they're hungry, and then you don't even give yourself half an hour, 10 minutes even, forget about half an hour.
Yeah.
Just go transition from social worker to mom or wife.
Or to TanIya.
To figure out what my thoughts are and what my feelings are. But that giving to yourself is so important. I say this in loads of my Facebook lives. People just get tired. She loves her cup of tea and her cake. Just to spend even 5 minutes or 10 minutes with my cup of tea and my cake is like my treat. That's my time.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you, do you think that the signs for burnout amongst social workers, because I mean burnout is a human phenomenon, we can all experience it. I've interviewed business owners and doctors, and we all experience it. But do you think signs for burnout are different for social workers than they are for other people?
I think a lot of them are probably similar. But I think what we were just talking about, in a sense, can absolutely be a sign of burnout. If you find that you're having a harder time letting certain people go, in terms of at the end of the day, if you find that you're taking on a lot of that energy a little bit more, if you're if you find yourself thinking that maybe you're in the wrong line of work, is it possible that you're in the wrong line of work? Yes. But I also believe that oftentimes that's a way of coping, that we'll find ourselves thinking, oh, maybe I don't want to do this anymore, instead of being able to think about, how is this work affecting me? Because I think sometimes, going back to another guilt thing, I think, and shame potentially even, I think sometimes it's hard to acknowledge, because it's vulnerable, to say, this work is really getting to me. This is really feeling hard today or this week, or I'm feeling like I don't want to go into work anymore, or I don't want to see this client. It's really difficult for most people to admit that, because you feel like, oh my God, what does it say about me? What is wrong with me? I'm supposed to love this work. I'm supposed to be all altruistic, and it's everybody else, and that kind of thing. So being able to really honor the difficult times that we have, the times that we feel like we don't want to go to work, and maybe taking a mental health day, but recognizing, honoring that, and thinking, okay, maybe this isn't so much about not liking that client, or maybe this isn't so much about wanting to be in a different line of work. Maybe this is about feeling a little overwhelmed. Maybe this is about feeling just all of this emotion that I'm surrounded by, and maybe I need a couple of days off, or maybe I need to go spend some time with a friend. Maybe I need to take, instead of that 10 minutes, maybe I need an hour to just sit and do whatever helps fill you up. I think that if we did, that would make such a huge difference. And I think one of the reasons that I didn't struggle too much with that early on is that working in that rape crisis center was such a beautiful place to start my work, because there was so much emphasis on self-care. It was hugely important, and coming together as a group and being able to talk about the work and the impact on ourselves. That's so important for all of us. But if you just find yourself having a little bit more difficulty in any way, maybe being a little more irritable, maybe feeling like you're not tolerant so much with your children or your partner, or the drive home from work, that maybe some of that is happening.
Yeah, I know when I get very irritable, it's like, Tanya, you need to slow down. When I'm irritable in queues, this is taking so long. Why am I in front of the person, and that person in front always takes ages? Or I'm irritable to my husband, and he just looks at me and just, she's having one of those days again. I wanted to, I think you hinted at this, about the fact that sometimes, because we're dealing with so much pain and sometimes life and death and crises and chaos, do you think social workers and healthcare professionals have a tendency, this is a verb that one of my counselors in the past kind of introduced me to, I don't even know if it actually is a proper English word, do you think we tend to awfulize a lot?
We do. I think that a lot of us really do. And I think quite often that's part of vicarious trauma, is seeing everything as being really awful, really difficult, that we see abuse everywhere, we see struggle everywhere, we look at everybody as a potential perpetrator, we see injustice everywhere we look. It's part of that is, I think, what draws us to social work sometimes, just generally, is that we recognize how significant all of this stuff is. But I also think that it can become part of that. And again, I think that could actually be a sign of feeling burnt out or overwhelmed and needing to just take some time. And I think that so often, especially if you haven't had a lot of therapy for yourself, I think that it can be a really great opportunity to say, okay, because I truly believe that everybody should go to therapy. I don't care who you are, what field you're in, what your past is. I think everybody should go to therapy at some point in their life. So it can sometimes be a good opportunity to just have that space, have that person that is there for you. You do not have to be anything other than who you are. All you have to do is show up. Doesn't matter what your day has been like. It doesn't matter what you want to talk about, but to have that space to just have your own space held for you, because we don't get an opportunity to do that, certainly not in our home lives, especially if you have children or a partner,
Mm-hmm.
we're always taking care of other people. And so that sense that we tend to see this horrible, awful stuff everywhere that we look, I think tends to come from that. Because I will say that I feel, again, I think starting in the place that I did, that I had some great mentors, and that's not something that I've struggled with a ton. It comes up at times, but it's not something that I really have much difficulty with. In fact, so often, whether it's somebody coming into a social service agency for help or somebody coming into therapy for whatever reason, I am so filled with hope and excitement when somebody, because they have that awareness, like, okay, not only is there something for me I can work on here that can help me feel better, but I deserve the support to have that. And to me, that is just such okay, I'm getting chills just thinking about it. It just fills me with so much excitement and hope for that person. There's obviously a lot of difficult stuff that's going to come with that. But what I connect to the most is that they're coming in, and the potential for the change within how they feel is so huge, that even with all the difficulty that they're coming in with, because they've been living with that difficulty, they've already been living with all of that difficulty. And if they're actually doing something about it, then that's a huge, powerful, exciting step.
Very powerful. And I wanted to ask you, just reading your bio, the question came up for me is, how do you listen to the whisper of your soul?
So I think for all of us, part of it is intuition. I think part of it is the intuition, but I think it's also, most of us have moments when we ask ourselves, or when we say to ourselves, I wonder how it would feel if this. I wonder what I could do if this. I wonder what might happen if I try this. So we come up at different times for different reasons with these little questions. But instead of allowing ourselves to really fully just sit there with that and imagine all the amazing possibility, instead we shut it down. No, I don't have time for that. No, I'm too busy. No, that's too self-indulgent. No, I could never do that. So many different ways that we shut it down for any number of reasons. And oftentimes it is because we don't believe that we're deserving, worthy, or capable of whatever that thing might be. Or even this nagging sense of, this is something I continue to struggle with, but I just need to get over it. That, I think, is also a whisper. When you recognize there's this pattern of stuff that keeps coming up that doesn't feel good, your soul is letting you know that there's something there to heal. There's something there that is asking you to honor, so that you can release that, so you can heal it and find more happiness and connection in your life.
And I just wanted, you talk about your transformation to freedom, and is that one of the techniques you use? Because this is something I say to my clients, is about visualizing yourself in the future and what you would say to yourself and how would that future be, and just try to taste it and smell it, not just see it, try to hear what's around you. How would you say, for people that are being really, they're finding their work so heavy, they're finding the masses of things to do, the kind of, they're having to hold their clients, but they're also having to just do all the millions of administrative tasks, plus go to team meetings, plus it's just, they're pulled in so many directions. How do they honor themselves? How do you honor yourself?
Kind of going back to what I was talking about earlier about making it as much a priority as anything else in your life to take care of yourself. And that can look so many different ways, Even at work, you've got all the team meetings, you've got all the paperwork to do, you've got all the clients to see and all of that. If you have to go to the bathroom, go to the bathroom. Like, even something that simple
Yeah.
is taking care of yourself.
Yeah.
So obviously that's a thing that we can practice every single day. Two bigger things, making sure that you have support. Again, even if you don't have any trauma that you need to heal, or even if you've got something that you feel like you've done a lot of work around, but you're finding that you're still feeling so depleted at the end of the day or whatever, just maybe seeing about having support. We all need that, and we need a space where somebody is just holding that space for us with no expectation of anything in return, where we can just have that. And for me, my husband and I have been together a long time, and so he's a huge piece of that, and he's very supportive of my work. And there's this joke, because I don't have days that I feel like bad afterwards or really depleted specifically or anything like that. But some days, and it's not so much about client work as it is about all those other things and trying to get social media done and get a video out there, all of that other stuff. But some days it's like we have this joke that maybe I should just go get a job at Target. Because it does feel sometimes like the weight of the world is on your shoulders. And I think that in those moments, being able to, if we have practiced good boundaries, that can be really helpful. But really just making that time to take care of yourself. So if you feel guilty about it, if you're noticing that you're having a difficult time not thinking about a client or a client situation, that's even more of a sign that you need to do something for yourself. And maybe it is a mental health day. Maybe you take a day or a half a day where you sleep later, where you have lunch with a friend, you read, whatever that looks like for you, but deliberately doing it, like actually being very deliberate and saying, okay, this is my time for self-care. I am as deserving of this time and support as any of my clients are.
And the laws of generosity, they are so huge. When you learn them, and it's only something I've learned very recently actually, the 3 laws of generosity. You give to others. Lots of people know about that. You give to God. Lots of people know about that. Giving to yourself is not something that is taught. And
Yeah.
self-care, you want to call it self-care. Being generous to yourself is not something you are taught. And vicarious trauma, something that Peggy constantly talks about, is when you are traumatized by the work that you do. And you need to hold on to the fact that, yes, you can be traumatized by the work that you do, because you are human.
Yes.
We are all, people talk about independence. I'm an independent person. People talk about being dependent, codependent, but very few people talk about interdependence. And we are humanity. We need each other.
Absolutely. Yes.
And I have learned so much from you. It's just, I'm so privileged to have you on this interview series and sharing all that you have shared with us. Thank you for sharing so much, Peggy. Thank you so much. Bye.